Okay, so here we are. This is the second lecture on Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is on demand and supply. And last time we talked about demand, and this class period we're going to talk about supply, and then we're going to put the two together and talk about how markets work. But before I do that, I have got some articles I want to bring to your attention. One is in the Wall Street Journal here, and it's from Personal Journal, and it says Econ 101 after recess. It says, in the wake of the financial crisis, school districts, meaning high schools, are teaching economics more and more. And it says, the first paragraph says, what is the basic economic problem all societies face? This is a sixth grade class. And this is a question that the sixth grade teacher is asking the class. So what is the basic economic problem? Now, you should be able to answer that. And the way the students answered it says a student raised his hand and says scarcity. So in one word, that is the economic problem. And then the teacher asked for a definition, and the class responds in unison, people have unlimited wants but limited resources, which is exactly what we've been talking about, right? The economic problem. We live in a world of scarce resources, and yet people have unlimited wants and needs. So how do we meet their needs in this world of scarcity? So that is the central core of all economics. And he talks about not bad for a bunch of sixth graders. Scarcity, elasticity, marginal returns are now being taught in some schools to children as young as 10 years old. So you should know what those things are by now. Scarcity, elasticity, in fact, we're going to talk a little bit about elasticity now, and marginal returns. So anyway, I just found that was interesting. In fact, in today's Wall Street Journal, there's an article, just to make a point here. It says, Oregon first require higher wage in cities. And the minimum wage in Oregon could be raised as high as $15 an hour. So the question is, and this is one of the points I want to make, is if a city raises the minimum wage to, let's say, $15 an hour, then first of all, what effect is that going to have on prices? Obviously, right? I mean, if you owned a business and you were paying, let's say, $8 or $9 an hour, and about now you got to pay $15 an hour, that's certainly going to be an increase in your cost, and to make up for those increase in costs, you're going to have to raise your price. So then the next question is, well, as a result of this minimum wage law and as a result of the higher prices, which businesses gain and which businesses lose? And the answer to that question is elasticity. Elasticity. So the answer is those companies that face a relatively inelastic demand curve could gain, and those that face a relatively elastic demand curve will lose. You want somebody close that door? So what does that mean? What is elasticity? Well, in the introduction, and since then I've talked about the concept of elasticity. See, now what is the name of this course? The Principles of Macroeconomics, correct? Well, principles. Elasticity is one of those principles. See, what are principles? Principles are concepts that enable us to better understand how the world works, to better answer certain questions. Like the question here is, if we have a minimum wage of $15 an hour, which businesses are hurt and which businesses may gain? Well, that all depends on the price elasticity of demand. For a for a company's products. Now, what is price elasticity? Well, if a business raises price, two things happen, right? On the one hand, they get more money per unit, correct? But on the other hand, if we raise price, what's going to happen to sales? They're going to go down. So when a business has to raise price, two things happen that offset one another somewhat. See, they get more money per unit, but they lose sales. Now, which offsets the other? In other words, if a business is selling something that is a necessity with few substitutes, and they raise wages, then their sales may drop off a little bit, but the amount of money they make per unit will more than offset the small decline in sales. In other words, a business that faces a relatively inelastic demand curve will raise price and their total revenue will increase. But if a business faces a price elastic demand curve, that means that when it raises price, its sales will fall way off, okay, and so when it raises price, it's going to lose more money than it gains. See, it may make more money per unit as it raises price, but its sales will drop off so much that the amount of money it loses is more than the amount of money it gains because of the higher price. So the original question was, if a city raises the minimum wage, who hurts and who benefits? Companies that face a relatively elastic demand curve are hurt, and companies that face a relatively inelastic demand curve could actually benefit due to the fact that their total revenues go up, and also due to the fact that they might have less competition because they'll drive some competitors out of business. Anyway, that's something they're teaching in 6th grade now. I thought that was interesting. On the same page, by the way, there's here's an article that says critics of too big to fail go too far on banks. And it just says that the latest upheaval in European banks shows that Europe's rigid rules require bondholders to be bailed in if banks fail or in some circumstances come close to regulatory capital minimums. So let me read that again. Some rules in Europe require bondholders to be bailed in if banks fail. Now, what does that mean?
So you're paying people to buy some of your stocks, whatever.
Well, now, okay. Now, if you let me give you an example. If you're talking about a bank, and a bank suffers losses, and regulatory policies say that the bank will be able to bail, that the bank will be helped by being bailed in. What does that mean?
Bailed into what?
Well, that's the term, bailed in. There's a bail out. See, if a company fails and the government comes in and gives money to that company, that we say, well, the company's been bailed out. But this says that companies will be bailed in.
So you have to pay someone.
Well, who's going to pay?
Well, you don't have any money.
Well, somebody's got money. Who's got the money? Now, if you're talking about a bank, who's got the money?
Stockholders?
No.
Individuals associating with that.
Individuals who have put money in the bank. Correct? I mean, that's how a bank gets their money, right? I mean, that's what banks are. People deposit money in the bank, correct? So a bail-in is when banks take money from depositors to make the company whole. That's the definition of being bailed in.
Now, what happens if one of those individuals decides to withdraw a significant portion?
Well, if you withdraw your money before you're bailed in, then you don't lose it. But anyone who's got money in the bank when there's a bail-in, loses all of it or part of it.
The bank doesn't eventually repay you for it.
Depends on how they write the rules. I mean, it depends how. It's never been done before, so again, you see, I can't answer some questions because we're in uncharted waters. But according to this article, now listen what it says here. It says the latest upheaval in European banks shows the same thing. Europe's rigid rules, so now this is a rule, all right, by the central banking authorities. Europe's rigid rules require bondholders to be bailed in if banks fail. So now you know what bail-in means. See, the whole point is when you read stuff like this, I mean, my job is to educate you in terms of economics and how the world works. So that when you read things like this, you say, hey, I understand that. I know what they're talking about.
It still sounds like a bad idea.
Oh, well.
But I mean,
Again, we're not now. This is just that's normative economics. There are some people think that it's a good idea, and some think it's a bad idea. It's certainly a bad idea for depositors.
well, and that's where why would the bank go under, just losing all the people that wanted to deposit money there? If I had any inkling that was coming, I would pull out every cent I had.
Well, that's exactly what's.
That bank's just
But see, that's what we're talking about before. If people pull their money out, the threat of being bailed in has the same effect on depositors as negative interest rates, right? Because we talk, if with negative interest rates, if you have to pay a bank to hold your money, then what are a lot of people going to do?
mattress.
And if you fear that a bank is going to be bailed in, what do people do? Same thing, right?
Yeah.
So what is another article I had? In fact, I still had it here. Another article I had that we just talked about is how our let's see, is it right here? Yeah, this article here we already talked about the political war on cash. So what are governments in the process of doing to discourage people from taking their money, from putting money under their mattress? They're eliminating high denomination bills. That's what this article here is all about.
But then you just end up with more smaller bills.
Well, yeah.
Because if you have $1,000,
What you're,
taking $2,500.
what you're getting at is that we're living in a world that's gone insane. I mean, it really has.
That's a diagnosis.
It really has. I mean, that's a common understand. If you really understand what's happening, in fact, what I'm going to talk to you about next will really, clinch it that the world has really gone insane. And it's about the article that I emailed all of you. As the size of the derivatives bubble hanging over global economy hits record high. So before you can understand anything about this article, you got to understand what a derivative is. Okay, first of all, a derivative, according to this article, is a $710 trillion industry. Now, what is the total GDP of the United States? According to this article, it's about 17 trillion. What is the national debt, which is very high? 20 trillion. And we're talking about here of a market that's $710 trillion. I mean, if you can, if you can comprehend that, you're a genius. All right? So what is it? If this is the largest market in the world, what is it? So what is a derivative? Well, it's betting is a good way of summing it up. But the word derivative is very simple. I mean, don't think that these things are complicated. It's very simple. The word derivative comes from the word derive. So when you have a derivative, its value is derived from something else. Now let me give you a very quick example of what a derivative is, and I think I've explained this before, but I know it's beneficial to repeat myself. Let's say that I've got a piece of paper. Let's say I got a piece of paper here, and you and I get together and we make a bet. And the most common bet in derivatives market is on interest rates. So I bet that interest rates will be, maybe above 5% or more, and you bet that it'll be, less than 5% at a certain date in the future. Or we may bet on the value of two currencies. Like I'll bet that 2 months from now, or the value of the American dollar will appreciate relative to the Japanese yen, and you take the opposite bet. But whatever it is, we can bet on the weather, we can bet on anything. But whatever we bet on, we're betting on some event that's going to happen in the future, and one of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose.
So is it not actually called futures, where there is such a...
Well, yeah, futures. Well, yes, it's I'm glad you brought that up. It's akin to the futures market.
So could it be considered, you can kind of parallel the two?
Yeah. It's the same concept. See, what he's referring to is the futures market is a very old market that's used mostly in the agricultural business. A farmer would raise corn, plant corn in the spring and then sell it in the fall. Well, instead of waiting to the fall and selling his corn for whatever the market price is, the farmer can sell his corn to some buyer at a set price. So when the fall comes and whatever the market price of corn is, you're going to have a winner and you're going to have a loser. Now the farmer, if the market price is higher than the strike price, then the purchaser actually gained, because he bought corn in the spring at a very low price, and now he can sell it at a very high price. But if the market price is lower than the strike price, then the farmer gains. But in agriculture, farmers don't do this in order to win or lose. They do it in order to give their life more stability, and because there's so much uncertainty in the agricultural market. And so if a farmer can sell his produce when he plants it, then whatever happens is not a matter of winning or losing. It's a matter of that farmer knows he can count on getting a certain price for his corn in the fall.
Well, and anything destroyed would be covered by insurance, hopefully. So.
Yeah, well, it gives it more. Yeah, there's less gambling involved with the futures market. But that's what a futures market is. It's two people coming together and making a decision that some future event is going to impact. Well, a derivatives market is simply two people coming together, and an over-the-counter derivatives market, over-the-counter means that there's no exchange, that it's just an agreement between two people, and no one else may even be privy to the agreement. That's what over-the-counter means. Again, that's another economic term, over-the-counter, as opposed to buying stock in the stock market, which is not over-the-counter. It's an index where all facts of everything is divulged to everybody. So anyway, now we got this piece of paper here, and now this piece of paper has value because who's ever on the winning side of this bet collects X number of dollars from the loser. So by you and I coming together and making this bet and putting it on a piece of paper and signing this piece of paper, we have just created something out of nothing that has value. And what is the value worldwide? About $710 trillion.
So is that what your derivations are based off of? Is that
Uh-huh,
what you're
yeah,
essentially betting
yeah,
on?
yeah.
So
There's
these
no,
guys are gambling with
yeah,
people
gambling.
and
There's
everything else.
nothing behind it. There's nothing behind it. There's no, I'm not selling you anything. There's nothing tangible behind it. It's simply it's
So how do you make
intangible.
money off this idea then? If
Well,
this is-
because the two of you have made this bet, and the loser is obligated to pay the winner.
But where is that money coming from? Out of his pocket? Out of
Well,
some
now
other
that
business he
there
owns?
you go. There is a great question because
Is it $760 trillion,
that
right?
really gets to the heart of the matter. His question was, where's the money come from? Now, get this. If you had this derivatives market, and let's say that the two people came together, let's say they had, I don't know, $100,000. And so they bet, person A's got $100,000, person B's got $100,000 in the bank. And so they bet $100,000, and the loser could pay the winner because of that $100,000 that he put up as collateral, right? Now, in this case, we don't really have a problem. But here's the problem. The problem is that the vast majority of the money used in the derivatives market has been borrowed. People don't have the money. The ratio is about 50 to 1. For every $1 in assets, people have wagered $50 in the derivatives market.
So is it $1 more stable than the 50 because you have it?
No, well, but you've only got, in other words, you bet 50, but if you lose, you've only got $1 to pay the 50
Yeah.
because you didn't have the other 49. If you're talking about a 1 to 50 ratio, which is about what it is.
So how do you, when you lose those other $49, how do you pay it back?
You don't. And we get a complete worldwide collapse of the economic system.
Somebody owes me money, and that means somebody's giving me money. And
But
giving me that.
it's not there. So person A can't pay person B can't pay C can't pay D, and the whole thing collapses.
Isn't the government trying to
Well, this
raise money?
this article talks about that. Since 2008, there's been some reforms, but the derivatives market is about 20% higher today than it was in 2008. And there have not been any regulations in terms of what we're talking about. The fact that this market exists, as I just explained it to you. I mean, whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea or what, the fact is that it's a done deal.
So what if this goes wrong? What sort of effect would it have?
It's got to go wrong. It cannot go right.
So when it goes wrong, what happens?
We have a complete worldwide collapse
of government
of everything.
So
We sink
what if
into
they
the
thought
dark
this was a good
ages.
idea? I mean, who came up with this? Was it just some economists on Wall Street sitting around going, "Oh, we can make money where it doesn't exist"? I mean, how do you come up with this brilliant idiocracy?
All right, now, well, let me partially answer that. All right, what is quantitative easing? Quantitative easing is when the Federal Reserve or the central bank, whichever country you're talking about, the central bank creates money to buy assets. The most common are bonds from the central government. All right, and that should and governments all over the world has been very active over the past 5 to 7 years of creating money. Now, why has not all this newly created money caused inflation? Because the increase in the money supply does not cause inflation unless the money gets into the the not local economy, but the economy. Like if you're talking about American dollars, and we're talking about the American economy.
How can it not unless it's sitting in a room somewhere? Not
Well, where is it going? You know, what's the reason, despite quantitative easing, why has that not caused inflation? Because where has much of the money gone? Into the derivatives market.
So the U.S. is playing that game too with
Oh, big time.
untold amounts of money.
Oh, big time. We're one of the largest
So-
players. Now, in terms of banks, well, get this. I mean, look at this. Talk about, let's see. Let's say interest rates. Citibank. How much money has Citibank wagered in the derivatives market? $62 trillion. That's one bank.
Now, see, you could have used a third of that and paid off the debt and
How,
gambled with the rest of it.
how much has the Deutsche Bank? Let's see, Deutsche Bank. I'm trying to find it here. I might have to go by memory. Well, Deutsche Bank has more than $75 trillion in derivatives. Deutsche Bank is the largest bank in Germany.
Probably Central Europe.
According to official government numbers, the top 25 banks in the United States now have a grand total of more than $236 trillion in the derivatives market.
Those are actually countries, not banks.
No, banks.
Okay.
The top 25 banks in the United States,
Okay.
according to government official statistics, has a total of $236 trillion wagered in the derivatives market.
How accurate are those government numbers?
Well, I don't know, but it's a lot of money. Whether I don't know how accurate it is, but the point is that this is something that's going to affect everybody, and yet very few people are really aware of it. And that's why, I mean, I'm hoping that's why, partly why you've taken this course, because see, you're learning things that most people don't know. And yet, are these things going to affect all of us? Well, you bet they are, big time. Yeah.
I read on the internet where they're saying that the stock market's gonna crash in 2016, and that we are all going to go into a depression worse than the 1930s.
Well, the derivatives market collapse could certainly cause that, but again, you see,
What would cause it?
why is it? See, there are always reasons for these things. Why is the stock market so high? Because of low interest rates. See, if interest rates were determined by the market, which is what this chapter is all about, if interest rates were determined by the market, they would be a lot higher than they are today. The only reason they're as low as they are today, and even negative in places in Europe, is that is government, or at least monetary authorities in connection, working with the central government.
What would cause the difference?
Wait a minute, let me finish my thoughts. So with these very low interest rates, very negative interest rates, if people can't make a return in terms of interest, then what has that encouraged a lot of them to do? Put their money in the stock market. And that's why, the biggest reason why the stock market has increased so much in value. See, it all gets back to low interest rate, quantitative easing, low interest rates, or even negative interest rates. I mean, if when things collapse, if you ask me, what was really the central cause? Well, what really it's the quantitative easing. It's government policy of quantitative easing that is going to cause a collapse. Yeah, well, she was.
Okay.
But was it you? Maybe
Yeah.
it was. Yeah, go ahead.
Mine was just, what would cause the differentials market to collapse? Is that like if Citibank pulled out their 63 trillion, would it collapse the entire market of what is 730 trillion?
Well, the collapse is inevitable because you've got two parties. I mean, it's like if you and I get together and we make a bet, and we wager $100,000 on on the outcome of some future event, but we don't have $100,000. Neither of us have $100,000. Maybe the most that we have is $500. Well, one of us is going to come up short. I mean, nothing else can happen.
So do you go bankrupt? Do you
Then you
burn the money up? What happens here?
you implode. Then you sell your assets. And you owe other people. See, it's called leverage. See, that the world is so highly leveraged. Now, what does that mean? That means that so much of what's happened in the world in terms of students, student debt is more than credit card debt. You're all highly leveraged. Okay, highly leveraged means that you've done what you've done by borrowing the money. And the whole world is so highly leveraged that once things start to head south, then you're going to have this dominoes effect. And the collapse would be very, very sudden and complete.
Well, and then would you not have individuals being arrested for defaulting on loans, defaulting on paying their taxes, because the money does not exist? So now you have this endless cycle of people going to jail, and then
I don't know. I wish I could answer questions like that. I mean, I wish I could see into the future, but I've got no idea.
Down the road would tell you that one's going to end up happening.
I don't know. You can speculate, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, if they.
I mean, I know it's not good.
Everything.
I know it's not good, whatever results, but I mean, if I have an article I was going to show you on Argentina, I think, but similar things have happened in other countries like Argentina, and if you read about these countries, you'll get a glimpse of what it's like when there's a complete collapse of the economy. In Argentina, one of the reasons that they're getting to a point where they can't feed their people is because theft is so great. Farmers wake up in the morning and someone has stole either their tractor or stole parts off their tractor. People steal in order to survive. But if you steal from a farmer, then the farmer can't grow crops, and that's exactly what's happening in Argentina today. I mean, if you want to get a glimpse, to answer your question, if you want to get a glimpse of what's happening or what could happen, look at Argentina.
Well, that's primarily an agricultural base.
Yeah, sure.
Lots of sheep.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we spent a lot of time on that, but that's what this really course is all about. So let's get back to the chapter. I'd like to finish this today. Let's see, slideshow from current slide. Now, last time we talked about the demand curve. Now, keep in mind what this chapter is all about. What this chapter is all about is it's an explanation, a graphical explanation of how free markets work. Okay, that's what this is. It's a graphical, meaning that we got demand curves, supply curves. We got a graph here, and we're using this graph to illustrate how a free market works. Okay. So what is supply? A relation showing the quantities of a good producers are willing and able to sell at various prices during a given period of time, other things constant. Now again, I emphasized this last time, what does that other things constant mean? That means that when we change price, we assume that nothing else changes.
What else would change?
Well, actually we're going to look at those things. Like, we already, when we're talking about demand curve, I gave you 6 reasons that that when we relaxed that everything else being equal assumption, then there were 6 things we talked about, like the size of the market, consumer expectations. These are non-price determinants that can shift the demand curve. And we're going to find out the same thing with the supply curve. There are non-price determinants that can shift the supply curve. But before we get to that point, if you're talking about if price changes, then there's going to be a change in the quantity supplied as measured on the horizontal axis, but the supply curve itself does not change. See, supply curve is a curve showing quantities of a good supplied at various prices, other things constant. And what is the law of supply? The quantity of a product supplied in a given time period is directly related to its price. Other things constant. Again, we're changing price, we're assuming nothing else changes. Now, what we're saying here is that there's a direct relationship between price and quantity. If price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. That's a direct relationship. Price goes down, the quantity supplied goes down. See, that's a direct relationship, unlike demand curves where you had an inverse relationship. Now, why, and this is really quite simple, why is it that when the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up? Now, in order to understand it, you've got to have a split personality. We see what that means is when you're looking at demand curves, who are you? You're among the group who's doing the demanding. But if you're looking at supply curve, who are you? You're amongst the group who's doing the supplying. So we got 2 completely different groups of people here.
Consumers and producers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, consumers and producers usually. So if you're a producer and the price of your product goes up, now what's causing the price of your product to go up? It's not you raising the price, but it's the market, it's people bidding against one another, it's the people bidding up a higher price. So what we're saying here is that the price of your product is going up, and that will give you an incentive to increase the quantity supplied because you are making more money at the higher prices.
Now, could you not?
Well, let me finish my train of thought. So how do we know that for sure? I mean, how do we know for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that if the producer raises price, that the producer will make more money?
Somewhat.
Well, how do we know that? We know that because we have assumed that nothing else changes. In other words, if you're a producer and your costs don't change, there's nothing that changes except you can get a higher price for your product. Now, if that's the case, are you going to make more money? Yes. That's 100% certainty that you're going to make more money at the higher prices because we have assumed that nothing else changed when price changed. Now, therefore, if you're the producer and the price goes up, what happens to your incentive, and the key word here is incentive, what happens to your incentive to supply? It goes up. Aren't you in business to make money? Don't you want to make a profit? Even maximize your profits? So when the price goes up, you're going to increase the quantity supplied because your motivation is higher profits. And likewise, when the price goes down, you're going to make less money, and therefore there's going to be a decrease in the quantity supplied. Now notice here I did not say that there's going to be an increase in supply or a decrease in supply, because there's not been an increase in supply or a decrease in supply because only price has changed. And when we change price, we're moving along a stationary curve. The curve itself is not changing. The quantity supplied is changing as measured on the horizontal axis. Now, what has to happen in order for there be a change in supply? Well, just like with demand curves, something has to change other than price. Something that we call a non-price determinant. Something that determines supply, but it's not price. Okay? So, anyway, I'm going to, so here's a picture of a decrease in the price, looking at supply curve. Now see, as price went down, did anyone see supply change? That red line that represents supply is not changing, is it? There's not a change in supply when price changes. Now, when price changes, what is changing? Yeah, down here, the quantity supplied is changing. As the price goes down, the quantity supplied goes down, as measured down here on the horizontal axis. Okay? Now, what I'm going to talk about next, just as we did with demand, is what happens when we relax the everything else being equal assumption. What happens when we allow things to change other than price? Well, then we're going to get a shift of the whole curve. Well, what kinds of things can change that will affect supply? And that's what we're going to talk about next. But before we do that, we've got to have some definitions. And before I talk about that, one definition is a relevant resource. Resource is used to produce the good in question. It's a relevant resource. In other words, what would be a relevant resource for a cattle farmer? Well, hay, right? I mean, fencing, maybe the cost of building a barn for the cows. Anything that the cattle farmer would use to have cattle is a relevant resource. See, now what would be the relevant resource for a corn farmer? Well, the relevant resources for a corn farmer would be different than a cattle farmer, right? Because those two different things.
Certain things are going to overlap.
Yeah, certain things will certainly overlap because they're both farmers, but and it certainly would. But all that a relevant resource is that whatever market the supplier is in, whatever resources that supplier uses, is what is called that we say that those resources are relevant to whatever's being produced.
So that's the stuff you get tax write-offs on, and then you can.
Oh well, I don't know. It depends
Well,
on.
it's not relevant.
Depends
Why
on.
would you get to do that? If
Well, it
you're a
depends on
farmer,
the.
you can't
Let's
write
not get
off
into that
farmers.
because tax laws can be anything that tax writers make. That can differ from country to country or from time to time. Now, what are alternative goods? Other goods that use some of the same types of resources used to produce the good in question. In other words, if you're a farmer and you own, let's say, 100 acres, do you have a choice of what you can plant on those 100 acres? Well, sure. Corn, cabbage, lettuce. There's all. Now, if you've got 100 acres and you're planting corn, but that land could be used to plant lettuce, then lettuce would be an alternative to corn. So we say that lettuce is an alternative good to corn because a farmer can plant one or plant the other, given the resources that are available.
So that ties into an opportunity cost as well.
Yeah, but we're not going to get into that. But yeah, right now we're just talking about definitions. So important, again, like with the demand curve, know the difference between a change in quantity supplied and a change in supply. So what is a change in supply? A shift in a given supply curve caused by a change in one of the non-price. Okay, now here something's going to change that will determine supply that's not price. And what are some of those things that can change? Well, here's a list of 5 things that can change that might cause a shift in supply curves, a change in technology. You know, it's almost hard to believe, but you know, the iPad. Now I've got a mini iPad. My wife has a mini iPad. We both use them all the time, and you know, that was invented in 2010. I mean, you know, the iPhone hasn't been around for much longer than that. I mean, it's really unbelievable how our lives have changed with inventions that are very, very recent. So a change in technology can cause a shift in supply curves. You know, with the what has happened to the supply curve for landline phones? It's shifted way to the left, correct? Because you know, more and more people. Now, I mean, I haven't had a landline phone for many years. You know, I've got you know, I mean, like most people, I happen to have an iPhone. I've got an iPhone. My wife has an iPhone, and who needs a landline? So because of a change in technology, the supply curve for landline phones has shifted to the left, but what has happened to the supply of iPhones and iPads? It's shifted to the right. So a change in technology, see, can affect a shift in supply of different, you know, different products. Okay, another reason that will cause a shift in supply is the prices of relevant resources. Now, for example, now if you're a farmer and you can plant corn or you can plant cabbage, well, no, this is the wrong one. I'm talking here about alternative goods. A relevant resource would be there's a price change of the resources that you need to produce whatever it is you're producing.
So like diesel for the tractor?
Yeah, like diesel for the tractor, exactly. That would be a relevant resource. I mean, yeah, relevant resource. So like the diesel for tractors, if diesel prices go way down, then farmers can do what they do. You know, they might be able to plant more acreage, for example, because it's going to cost them less money in diesel fuel. See, that would be a change in the price of a relevant resource that would affect supply of, you know, whatever it is the farmer's, you know, growing. So you know, like cattle farmers. I mean, like, you know, if the price of hay went way up, and cattle farmers, I mean, if they had to buy their hay and feed their cattle hay over the winter, if that was so expensive that they would lose money, what would they do? They would bring, before the winter, they would bring more of their cattle to market, correct? So there would be an increase in the supply of cattle. If the price of hay goes way up, then there's going to be an increase in the supply of cattle. Now, notice here, when I say supply of cattle, do I mean cattle that's standing on 4 feet? No. In economics, when we talk about supply, we're in demand, we're only talking about what's happening at the market.
At the final good.
Well, the market. It's got to be brought to market where you have a buyer and your seller. It's like that automobile. You know, I've talked about several times. If General Motors produces an automobile and that automobile sits in the parking lot, is that counted as part of the supply of automobiles? No. Why? Because no one's bought it. There's been no market transaction. Just as soon as someone buys it, and therefore has put a value on it, then it becomes part of supply. Same with this. If the price of hay goes up, many cattle farmers will bring their cattle to market, and when they bring their cattle to market, then the supply of cattle increases, meaning the whole curve shifts to the right. Okay? So that's a change in the price of a relevant resource. Prices of alternative goods is a third reason that will cause shifts in supply curves. See, let's say again you're a farmer. That's a good example here. And you can either grow corn or cabbage. Now, the price of corn has gone down. The price of cabbage has gone up. So what might you decide to plant? Cabbage, right? The price of corn is going down, price of cabbage is going up. So, and your costs, are going to be about the same one way or the other. So you're going to plant more cabbage and less corn. Why? Because there's been a change in the price of an alternative good. See, let's say you were planting corn to begin with, but the price of cabbage goes way up. So, because there's a change in the price of an alternative good, you decide to plant less corn and more cabbage. So the supply of cabbage increases, the supply of corn decreases. See how that works? This is what a lot of farmers do. They, and this really brings me to when we put the two curves together. But what a lot of farmers do is that they, when they make a decision in the spring of what to plant, they look at last year and they say, well, the price of corn was very high, and therefore I'm going to plant more corn. But if all farmers look back and say that last year the price of corn has increased, and all farmers decide to plant more corn, yeah, exactly. What happens in the fall is the supply curve of corn increases, which is going to drive the price down. And yet, many farmers never learn this lesson. That's a formula for failure. What you do is you look what you should do as a farmer is look last year and see, which products have gone down in price, knowing that most farmers won't plant that, and therefore if you plant that, then you're going to make more money in the fall. But very few farmers understand that. Anyway, producer expectations, of course, can affect supply curves, and for whatever reason. And expectations, that's a mental thing. If people become more optimistic in terms of certain products or certain industries, they think there's going to be a boom in some industry, then they'll tend to participate in that industry more or produce more of that product because of their expectations of what they believe is going to happen in the future. So expectations, that can be anything. Anything can affect people's expectations.
Can
But
it saturate and then actually?
Well, that brings us into when we put the two together. Let me wait to answer that, because right now I'm just talking about supply, without talking about the market. Number of producers, well, again here, there's a tendency, if the number of producers in the market increases, that there'll be an increase in supply. Now, did I say that if there's more producers in the market, that supply will increase? Now, I really can't say that for certain, but what I can say is that if there's going to be an increase in the number of producers in a certain industry, that there's going to be a tendency for supply to increase. And that's true. And vice versa, of course. So just like with the demand curve, I gave you 6 reasons that could cause shifts in demand curves. I've just given you 5 reasons that could cause shifts in supply curves. These are what are called non-price determinants, things that determine supply, but they're not price. So what happens when we put supply and demand together? Well, we get what is called a market equilibrium. Now, equilibrium is one of the most important concepts in all of economics. The concept of the equilibrium. And there are several ways to define equilibrium, but the one I like the best is an equilibrium is the point toward which the economy tends. Okay? So in other words, you know, if this newspaper was an equilibrium and the economy was over here, then eventually what's going to happen? It's going to gravitate toward this newspaper. And if things were over here, if this were an equilibrium, if the economy was over here, then there would be a tendency for the economy to gravitate back toward this newspaper.
Isn't that ideal?
Well, it's just a definition. I mean, that's just a definition of what an equilibrium is. An equilibrium is the point toward which the economy tends. That's just definition. Okay, now, say an equilibrium doesn't mean that two things are equal. An equilibrium means that it's a point that the economy tends toward. Okay, so that's a very important concept, but one that we'll get lots of practice on. See, an equilibrium is a point toward which the economy tends, all right. What is disequilibrium? Well, again, this is just definition. So much of economics is just definition. If we say that we are in a disequilibrium, see, again, if this newspaper represents an equilibrium, then if we are in a disequilibrium, that simply means that we're not at the equilibrium, that we're over here or we're over here. That's what that term means, disequilibrium. There's always an equilibrium point, and whatever it is we're looking at, we're not at that equilibrium point. We're over here. Now there will be a tendency in time for things to gravitate toward this, but we're not at the equilibrium. We're somewhere else. So we say we're in disequilibrium. Again, it's just vocabulary. So what is a surplus? An excess of quantity supplied over the quantity demanded at a given price. A surplus means that producers are wanting to supply more than demanders are willing to buy. And what is a surplus? Well, a surplus, when there is a surplus, the supplier will lower price to get rid of the surplus. You know, if there's if the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, then suppliers are going to start supplying less. And a shortage is an excess of quantity demanded over the quantity supplied at a given price, meaning that the people are wanting to buy more than there's made available. And when there's a shortage, which is a disequilibrium situation, when there's a shortage, then consumers will bid the price up to determine who gets and who does not get. If there's a shortage, how do we decide in the free market who gets? Well, those people with the money, with the high money, and those who want it the most get, and the other people don't get. Okay, and again, she told me she had to leave early, so I do appreciate that. Anyway, I'll explain this to you on the graph. It makes more sense. The condition that exists in a market when plans with buyers match with plans with sellers. That's when we have market equilibrium. So let me just, this graph here sums up everything we've done so far in this chapter. Here we have a downward sloping demand curve. And we've talked about why demand curves are downward sloping, why there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity, right? First part of this chapter. In the middle part of this chapter, what we're on now, well, what we were on, now we're going into the third part, but the middle part of this chapter talked about supply curves. So we have an upward sloping supply curve, and we talked about why supply curves are positive, why there's a direct relationship between price and quantity. Price goes up, quantity supply goes up. Price goes down, quantity supply goes down. So we got a demand here, one group of people. We got supply here, another group of people, okay, in the same industry. And so now the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded at 75 cents. Now, if I ask you where the where the equilibrium is, no, if I say why is 75 cents an equilibrium, and you say, well, because that's where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, that doesn't answer the question. Now, what question that does answer is, where is the equilibrium? And the equilibrium is at 75 cents in this example, because that is where the quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. But why is 75 cents an equilibrium? Well, in order to prove why, we have to move away from it. See, in other words, again, if I got this piece of paper, how could I prove to you that this paper here was an equilibrium? Well, the proof would be that if we moved away from it, that there would be a natural tendency to move back toward it. And if we go in the other direction, and there's a natural tendency for everything to gravitate back toward the piece of paper, see, anytime we go away from it, there's a tendency for things to move back to it, then what have we proven? Well, we've proven that this piece of paper is an equilibrium. That's how you prove that a point is an equilibrium when it is one. You move away from it and see what happens. So that's what we do here. How do we prove that 75 cents is an equilibrium? Well, if you go above 75 cents, now when price goes up, what do demanders say to themselves? We don't want as much. But what do suppliers say to themselves? We want to supply more. Well, with demanders wanting to buy less and suppliers wanting to supply more, eventually what happens? We get more quantity supplied than quantity demanded. We get a surplus. And in order to get rid of the surplus, what's going to happen? There's going to be a fall. I mean, when suppliers have a surplus, what do they do to get rid of the surplus? They lower the price, right? So the price goes down. Now, in the real world, the price isn't going to go down to 75 cents and then stop, because everything in life is a flow situation. You know, things don't hit a certain point and then just stop. Life is change. You know, the only thing in life that we can depend upon is change. Change is inevitable. It's part of life. So the price is going to fall down below 75 cents, but if it goes down below 75 cents, you see, as price goes down, what do suppliers say to themselves? Well, we don't want to supply as much. But what do demanders say to themselves? Well, we want more. Well, with demanders wanting more and suppliers wanting to supply less, we get a shortage. Now, in a free market, how to decide who gets when there's a shortage? Well, people bid against one another like at an auction, and the highest bidders get, and the lowest bidders don't get. And who are the highest bidders? Number one, those who want it the most, and number two, have got the money to pay for it. And that's how we solve what is called the allocation problem in a free market. Okay? See, what causes an increase in equilibrium price, an increase in demand, or a decrease in supply? For example, here's demand, here's supply, and, oh gracious, my heavens. When there's an increase in demand, what happens? Well, there's going to be increase in price and increase in the equilibrium quantity. A change in a higher equilibrium price from 75 cents to $1 and a higher equilibrium quantity from 20 units to 24 units. Well, here's another scenario. Here we got demand, here we got supply, and supply decreases. If supply decreases, what happens to equilibrium price? It goes up. What happens to equilibrium quantity? It goes down. Now, let me give you a tip here. There are going to be some questions on the test like this. And in order to get the correct answer, all you've got to do is draw on a piece of paper, here's a demand curve, upper sloping, downward sloping demand curve, upper sloping supply curve. And if it says that supply shifts to the left, you just draw it. You just shift supply to the left, and the answer jumps right off the piece of paper and hits you in the face. Right? So you don't have to know anything. You just do what the question says, and the answer here, obviously, if supply shifts to the left, you're going to get a higher price and a lower quantity at the new equilibrium. In fact, I had a student come into my office. This is in my microeconomics course, 202, but he had some questions about the test, and some of the questions were like this. And I looked at the question and I couldn't answer it. I mean, I've got to go grab a piece of paper and draw it. And as soon as I did, then the answer was obvious. See, I mean, I don't, memorize the stuff. Okay. So what causes a decrease in equilibrium price? Well, again, here we have demand, here we have supply. Demand decreases, we got a decrease in equilibrium price and a decrease in equilibrium quantity. And here, again, here's the equilibrium at 75.7. Supply increases, and again, we get a lower price and a higher quantity. So, these are just different scenarios depending upon. Now, what happens when, in this case, we get a big increase in demand, but a small increase in supply? Well, if you get a question that says something like this, you get a small increase in supply and a big increase in demand, all you got to do is increase demand. I mean, it's just a one-step solution. I mean, if demand increases relative to supply, then the net effect is the same as if demand is simply increased. Okay? So that's a tip for you. Now this is the last one. See, here we have a small increase in demand. This will be the last one. I don't think we hear that again. We've got a big increase in supply, and again, the answer just jumps out at you. And again, the answer would be the same as if we simply had an increase in supply, because supply is increased relative to the increase in demand. Okay, now I've got 10 minutes. This class, by the way, is over at 2:50. I read these student evaluations that you all wrote, and somebody complained that I ran over, the time limit of 20 minutes too. But, this class ends at 10 minutes too, right? I had to look that up, make sure, but it does end at 2:50. Okay, what is a price floor? A minimum legal price below which a good or service cannot be sold. Like, what would be a good example of a price floor? The minimum wage law, right? Again, we're passing a law that says that wages cannot fall below a certain amount. If we make the minimum wage of $15 an hour, then that means that no employer can pay less than $15 an hour. It's a price floor, below which, say it's a floor because below which it's illegal to go, according to legal authorities. And here we have a picture of a price floor. Here, let's say here's the demand for labor, here's the supply for labor. So the equilibrium price would be where the quantity demand equals quantity supplied. But I should change this, right? Instead of $6, it'd be more realistic of maybe 10 or 15. But anyway, if we set the minimum wage above the equilibrium wage, then what has got to result? It's just mathematics. It's not opinion. It's simply mathematics. What has got to result is that we're going to have a surplus. And if you're talking about labor, what's the surplus? Unemployment. Okay? If you raise the, now, catch hold of this. This is important. There is no argument here. All right? There's no argument. Is this an argument for or against the minimum wage? No. It's got nothing to do with the minimum wage per se. What's it about? What's it about is, if you have a minimum wage law, what is the minimum wage relative to the equilibrium wage? If the minimum wage is greater than the equilibrium wage, then you're going to get more unemployment, period. That's just mathematics. If the minimum wage is equal to or less than the market wage, then it's not going to have, you will have no more unemployment. So is the minimum wage law good or bad? The answer is that all depends. What does it depend on? It depends on where you set the minimum wage relative to the equilibrium wage or the market wage. See, there is no argument there. That's just economics. That's just mathematics. Okay? So what is a price ceiling? A maximum legal price above which a good or service cannot be sold. And a good example of this would be rent control. See, if these were rental properties, and here you've got a supply of rental property, and here you got the demand for rental property, and the equilibrium rent is up here, you see, but the authorities say no, this rent is too high. We're going to set the rent below the equilibrium rent. We're going to set it down here to $400. Well, if you set if you have rent control, and usually this is a city thing like Los Angeles, New York, if you have rent control and you set the rent below the equilibrium rent, then what has got to result? The only thing possible is you're going to have a shortage of rental property. And again, that's just mathematics. Now, look what's happening here. If you have rent control, which would be a ceiling, saying that rent can't go above a certain amount, in this case $400, you've got winners and you've got losers. Same with the minimum wage law. If you set the minimum wage law above the equilibrium wage, you're going to get more unemployment, but you still get winners and losers. Who are the winners? Those people who are working and making a higher pay than they would otherwise. Who are the losers? Those people that don't have a job that would have a job otherwise. If you have rent control and you set the rent below a certain amount, you've got winners and losers. Who are the winners? Those people who are paying a lower rent than they would otherwise. Who are the losers? Those people that can't get rental property because there's a shortage. All right? You got winners and you got losers when you do things like this. But the net result in this case would be a shortage. Now we can go further. We can go further on this. I can go further on this, and I'm going to make an important point here. If you set the rent below a certain amount, and landlords it gets to the point where things change, inflation, costs, things like that. Buildings, wear out. I mean, they dilapidate. They need repairs, which are expensive. I mean, if those things happen, but so your costs increase as a landlord. Your costs may increase, but you can't raise your rent because of rent control. So what do? Well, you can't afford, or you don't have the incentive to put a new roof on the building. I mean, the roof leaks. Well, you just let it leak. The door's off the hinges, well, you can't afford to fix it, you just leave it. You know, the window breaks, well, you put cardboard over it. You know what I mean? I mean, this is what, when you've got rent control, this is what happens. What happens eventually is you get a slum. The number one reason for slums in your major cities is rent control. And again, it's not opinion, it's just mathematics. Now, here's the point. Why is rent control, for example, popular? And other things like the minimum wage, you know, same thing, anytime you have government coming in.
Because it's like seen as fair.
Well, fairness is a big part of it. Let's say I'm a politician, and I say, you know, and you all are renters, let's say, and I say, look, these landlords are taking advantage of you. You vote for me in office, and I'm going to go after those greedy landlords, and I'm going to force them to lower the rent, and so you're not going to be taken advantage of. Well, how many of you are going to vote for me? A lot of you, correct? Now, how could we bring about lower rents with plenty of rental property available, and that property is going to be well taken care of? What we would do is we would increase the supply curve of rental property. Again, downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply. If the supply of rental property shifts to the right, what happens? You get lower prices.
Oh yeah, because there's more competition and like variation.
Well, again, it's just demand and supply. Again, it's just mathematics. You move supply to the right, you get lower prices, more quantity, right? And your apartments are well taken care of because it's the equilibrium rent. So how do we do that? Well, the way we do that is that we give incentives for for investors to invest in more rental property. How do we do that? Well, we could lower regulations and taxes on investors so they would build more rental property, so the supply curve for rental property would shift to the right. We get lower rents, more rental property, and that rental property would be well taken care of. Now, what's the problem with that politically? Again, I'm a politician, and I say, look, if you vote for me in office, I'm going to lower the taxes on these investors. Now, most of you are not investors. Most of you are, renters. Now, how many of you are going to vote for me? Not many, correct?
Well, they don't see the correlation.
Why? Because they don't understand economics, which is exactly where we are today. I mean, people are supporting policies that only will bring them harm because they don't understand how economics works. See, that's what I'm illustrating to you here. All right, and this is, none of what I've said here is an opinion. It's just simply mathematics, if you understand demand and supply. Does that make sense? Okay, well, it is 10:02, 2:50, so y'all going to read chapter 5 for next time, right? So I'll cover chapter 5. Oh, by the way, we're off next week, right?
Yep.
So I won't see you for another week. Okay, let me shut this down.